Hey, what's up guys? JB here. Yet another ice unit coming into War of the Visions here this week, and it is the OG, the Frost Lord himself, Gilgamesh. You know, back when this game first started, Gilgamesh was the unit that I re-rolled for, and that original version was a good unit for a very long time, especially over on the manual side of the game where his Time Mage kit really put in a lot of work. Well, the Iceman is back again with a brand new invention, so let's dive in and see what he can do. Gilgamesh, Breaker of the Scourge, is a 100 cost ice unit. He will be repping that Sword A Red Mage group, one of the strongest weapon classes so far in the game, though one that we haven't really seen a unit for in some time. He has base 3-1 movement and he wears armors and helms. Starting it off with the TMR, this one is an accessory. It provides 2 casts of a Force Barrier effect, otherwise known as the Honeycomb Barrier that did originally debut with Squall from Final Fantasy VIII. Now just a quick recap on how that effect works. This will provide a 10% mitigation starting when you are 4 tiles away from your opponent. Now it gradually increases 10% per tile the farther you are away, capping it out at a total of 40% mitigation when you are at range 7. So a very strong item, you know, particularly against missile attackers. Really there's not a lot of those going around at the moment, but it is actually, I think, pretty decent even against the diamond area of effect units like of the Greatsword team, for example, where oftentimes they are hitting you maybe from 4 to 5 tile distance. So you, in that case, you'd be getting anywhere between 10 to 20% of undispellable, unbreakable mitigation, which is actually pretty decent. Now this TMR does have a second effect to it, which is also undispellable. It is an imbue to your attacks with a 30 healing power debuff, and because this is an on-hit effect, it does stack with other debuffs in the game. So I think overall this TMR is phenomenal. 2 useful and unique effects. In my opinion, one of the better TMRs that we've seen in some time. Moving now into Gilgamesh's stats, and as with other next generation units, the stats overall are very homogeneous, you know, amongst each other. There really hasn't been very much separation at all in terms of, you know, the various stats here, other than maybe a couple of areas. HP is definitely one differentiation point, and Gilgamesh is coming in as one of the stronger units in that category, right there next to King Mont as, you know, the highest of this next generation. Now, Gilgamesh is going to be coming in as our first magical scaling unit of this generation. He's going to be topping the charts there in base magic with an insane value of 462, topping even the previous leader in this category, Howlet the Heaven's Blade. Aside from that, Gilgamesh is pretty high on the crit rate index. Not a chart topping value, but really well above average there. Agility also very good for this unit, particularly if you opt to use his agility passive, which I think in most builds, you know, most people will. In terms of negatives here in the stats, I think the main one that you can point to is going to be that accuracy level of 179. Unfortunately, he doesn't have any passives to increase that, so although the Dex and Luck are actually in a pretty good spot, I think that's actually going to end up being one of the bigger weaknesses here for this unit in the long run. Looking now at the defensive picture, Gilgamesh is coming in with 0 defense and 4 spirit, nothing all that notable. The resistances though are solid, 20% versus slash, and then 10% against pierce, missile, and magic. He is carrying a single weakness here. It is against that strike damage, but it is a very large one at a 15% deficit. For his ailment resistances, we're looking at 50% against sleep and confusion, and then a 10% against disable. All 3 of those I think are valuable ones. Gilgamesh, though, being a magic scaling unit, somebody that you're going to be running at a high 97 faith, those status ailments in general are definitely going to be a big concern for him, you know, amongst the various units out there in the meta. For his mastery abilities, picking up 10% crit rate, which was factored into that total we looked at above. He's getting 40% reaction block and 15% debuff weakening. Now those last 2 effects are something that we have been seeing a general upward trend in power creep in the game as of late. And Gilgamesh here is going to be no exception, both very valuable effects. If you do take him to level 140, he's going to pick up 15% area resistance, a 20 additional crit damage, and then a skill upgrade as is custom. In terms of the recommended passives, he's got an absolutely incredible one you're going to have on at all times. Gives him some magic, some slash res pen, 15% unit resist to pair with the area resist in his mastery, and then a complete immunity to CT breaks in the game. I really do like that, not only as something that's very useful in the meta, but also as something that's very lore appropriate for this character, and certainly a nod to his original version, kind of that time magic mastery. Now to pair with that one, in most cases, I would opt for Blade Soul Lore to give him that Spirit Pen and agility, but he does have a couple of other nice situational passives you can look at, including a jump passive or maybe even an AP management passive if you happen to need it. In terms of a counter ability, he has a new unique one I think is going to be the preferred option. It's a 30% preemptive strike, and it will absorb 50% of the damage that you do deal with it. Nothing insane there, but I do think it's pretty solid, just sort of held in check by somewhat a limited range there of 3. Moving now into the main kit overview for Gilgamesh, we'll start off here with the buffs. He has a self buff that provides him courage, a flat 25% reduction to incoming physical damage, and it does provide him a chaser or a follow-up attack. And this one is a Bart style chaser, so it will trigger on any of your allies' attacks after it's turned on. Now this one is unique in the game as it does scale fully on his magic value, and it does have a high 86% base modifier, which was sort of the standard for Limit Burst in the past. So this is going to be capable of dealing significant damage. The other unique thing about this follow-up is that it's absorbent type damage, so any damage that he pulls off with this, it's going to go straight back into his HP pool. Now this one is going to be a 4-turn duration as well, so this follow-up attack is going to be lasting even longer into the fight than we've been used to with units in the past, like Bart's and others. So Gilgamesh, certainly this sets him up to be another very strong sort of self-sustaining bruiser here, right alongside units like Joom and A2. Now the next one up here is going to be the party buff. This one is going to provide 25% area resist and 25% physical and magical wide guard to both himself and his allies. A very strong defensive combo. Both of them though are going to be dispellable by the most recent meta units in the game like Joom, Cloud, and Sephiroth. On top of that though, he will be picking up a 7500 HP physical barrier, and certainly barriers are still very in vogue. Cloud and Mont at this point are the most notable in terms of units that are able to remove those. However, both of them are kind of more on a limited range and not their main attacks, so it does still make barriers overall a pretty strong play in the meta. Looking now at his attacks, his finisher skill is going to be a range 3 with a range height of 1, has a low 121% modifier. Just a single effect on this one, and when you do KO an enemy with this one, you will pick up a 20 CT bonus. I always like these as a finisher. It can sort of help give you that turn and order advantage in the mid-fight and maybe push you towards a win there. His second skill here, it's again going to be a single target, range 3, range height 1, this time coming in with a medium 165 modifier. Prior to the damage, this one will break any magic barriers that are present on your opponent. Pretty basic skill, but a very useful one in the situations where he does need it. Just a bit limited here on the range. The third skill is going to be his signature attack, getting up to a total range of 6 there on the long range diamond. 3 effects coming in here prior to the 200% large damage. We have a 60% area resist crush, a dispel of the shell status, and a dispel of any magic damage reduction that's present on your opponent. And that is what I call the Shell 2.0 effect. It's the effect that Joom and Helena both have on their buffs, and also the effect that is on Dario's aura ability. So Gilgamesh is able to get around and bypass all of those, and is the first unit in the game to be able to do so. Now the one note there, at least in terms of the aura, is that it doesn't fully dispel it, for your teammates as well. It is just only going to be able to dispel it on his cast only. The aura then would re-trigger after his turn, and any other of your teammates wouldn't be able to take that same benefit, but certainly his damage does get around it. Now this one does have a CT bonus on the KO, just like the first skill. However, this one can trigger up to 2 times, so you can potentially get up to a 40 CT swing or nearly half a turn. This one is a chain attack as well. This one is a 2-hitter. So as you can see there, this is an incredible skill. Very little that you are able to do to actually mitigate this damage outside of maybe a barrier or elemental resist. So this is essentially kind of a souped up version of his original Katetsu attack. Now the 4th skill here is going to be another area of effect attack, maxing out at that range of 4 there on the cross AoE. It's going to be coming in with that large 200% modifier, and prior to that damage, this will increase his spirit penetration by 40 for 3 turns, and this one is a guaranteed 100% hit. So again, a relatively basic one, especially compared to that last skill that we looked at, but definitely nice to have a 100% hit here to fall back on. Now, last but not least, we do have the Limit Burst. This one again is getting up to a range of 6 there on the large cross. This one is a magic-based attack, and the only one in his entire kit. We'll be getting a 240% XL modifier as we've been seeing on these next-gen Limit Bursts. Now, prior to the attack, he will boost his magic damage output by 20%, and that buff will last for 3 turns. So that will be excellent excellent, certainly for boosting up his follow-up damage. Now this one does also have a 67% chance to frostbite anyone that you hit, so this definitely fits in nicely with his motif of sort of, you know, healing back and outlasting his opponents and sort of suffocating their AP while he does so. Now this one again is a 100% hit here for Gilgamesh, so despite those accuracy woes there that we mentioned in the stats overview, he does have 2 guaranteed hits here that he can hedge against that. And as for his follow-up attacks, you know, the hit chance of those is fully predicated on the allies' accuracy when they trigger that, so you know, you can really boost up your allies' accuracy and ensure that he's hitting those attacks as well. Now, the week following Gilgamesh's introduction into the game, we will be seeing this Ice Chariot Vision Card Esper combination. This one's going to be effective for Bow, Fist, Katana, and Gilgamesh's own Sword A Red Mage group. In terms of the stats on the card, it's actually very similar to Dark Shiva with the agility and magic of party effects on it. The card, though, is perfectly tailored for Gilgamesh with the dexterity there and the base stats to enhance his crit rate, and that 15 human killer bestowed is going to be great for the follow-ups. Now, this card is actually the first agility card for the Sword A Red Mage group thus far in the game. It's kind of hard to believe with the amount of cards that they have, but that's in fact true. Not much else to say about it, you know, it's a great card. I would say though that if you do envision yourself sort of staying within that ice-water elemental mix, or maybe just even mono ice, and you already do have that Dark Shiva card that came out last year, I think that you can safely skip this one because it is, like I said, very similar in its effects. The real advantage of this card is going to be working outside of that dual element combo, maybe pulling in somebody like a Sephiroth or a Laya or a 2P or etc. The Esper that you get with this card is also very solid, so if you do end up going for this card, I think it is a pretty compelling overall package. The Esper comes with a pretty high agility. It is also the first UR Esper in the game that does have innate silence resistance, which is certainly even more interesting in those limited battles where the little Leelas come out into play. Now, another thing that I will note about the Esper, Gilgamesh himself doesn't have any innate area resist penetration like we did see with Cloud and with Sephiroth. However, this Esper does have a node on its board which you can activate, which gives you 20% area resist penetration, so that's certainly going to be nice for Gilgamesh or any other mages that can take advantage of it. Now, as mentioned at the beginning, Gilgamesh will be joining this Sword A Red Mage group. It does have the highest number of cards in the game, up to 21 cards if we do include Luciel's Vision card, which did just come out recently over in JP. Now, not only does it have a high number of cards, but a lot of them are actually very, very good ones. Some of the best ones, though, are limited time, like that Dwayne card, Cloud's Vision card, A2's Vision card, and then Summer Glaciela's card, although that one should be rerunning very soon here in Global. In terms of units, there were some decent ones that were released last year. Ferris, Howlet, Reagan. They have all fallen off pretty hard though in the meta. We're not seeing very much of them these days. The one that is still hanging on though is Summer Glaciela. She's still being used widely even at the top end of the game. So Gilgamesh coming in is certainly going to rise the prospects not only for Glaciela, but perhaps some of these other units as well. Although realistically, I do think that they are going to be waiting on some upgrades before they can really fully come back and better compete. Now, even if we do end up having to wait on some of those upgrades, it's not really the end of the world because the Red Mage group does have some very strong overlap with some of the other groups in the game. Most notably is going to be the connection with the Katana group, which they do share 8 total cards now, including the Ice Chariot card that we just looked at. So I think if you were looking for a prime partner for the Sephiroth that you just pulled during Advent Children, well, look no further here than Gilgamesh. Alright guys, here's the mock builds that I put together this week. The first one's going to be just a basic mono ice build. This one's going to be a triple bruiser setup here with Howlet and Tifa. Now you could certainly opt for Koldoa instead and sort of bring in that physical aura, but I do think that these 3 bruisers with their innate barriers, their self-healing, could be a pretty decent combo. Probably not amazing though. For equipment, I'm going to be using Gilgamesh's sword that does come with his event. I personally like that one, but there are other options like the blood sword, you know, if you wanted to go for more of a healing effect. I do like this new unique sword though. I think it gives him a little bit of everything, and I do think it's a good overall option. We're going to be pairing that with the Genji glove to improve his follow-up damage, and Gilgamesh being an armor unit, he does have access to use Rob's TMR for that keen blade effect, so that's what I'm showing here. Otherwise, I think any sort of agility TMR, you know, should be fine enough. For an Esper, I'm going to be going for the OG Bahamut for the magic and human killer. Dark Shiva is going to be another good option option. I think Bahamut is really if you're trying to emphasize the follow-up damage. For the vision cards here in the build, this is going to be a pretty standard mono ice setup, kind of building around those Dark Esper cards. For the Trust Stones, like I said earlier, Gilgamesh being a high faith unit, you will want to protect against the various status ailments that may be present in the meta. So I do have several of those here, including some that we do see on some TMRs like Vigas or Darios. If the play of Summer Glaciella continues to rise, I do think Stop would be another good option that you may want to cut out that fire resistant and throw that one in there instead. Now in terms of the set itself, HP or Luck I think are good options. You could also opt for a defense or spirit set if you really wanted to get that additional healing power. I think that's also a great option. Over on the offensive side, I am going to be emphasizing and boosting that crit rate with the Dex and crit. I think crit damage is another good option that you could pull in here, although I do prefer that reaction block, particularly in a mono setup where we don't have the luxury of any reaction block vision cards. All right, guys, here is setup number 2. This one's going to be building on the overlap between Red Mage and Katana, so we do have Summer Glaciella in there tanking for us, and then we're going to be bringing in that Advent Children Sephiroth. For the equipment, you can really go with the same options that we had there before, but I'm just kind of showing a couple of different options here. I think that with Gilgamesh's constant healing from his follow-up attacks, I do really like the Maximilian to take advantage of that conditional physical damage reduction that it has present on it. It does also enhance the debuff weakening and crit evasion, kind of enhancing his overall survivability. And I am really going to be emphasizing the debuff weakening here in this build also on the vision cards. Summer Glaciella is actually going to be capping out her debuff weakening in this build, and Gilgamesh and Sephiroth are not going to be far behind her. Now, if you do opt for the Maximilian armor, I think that you can then bring in the blood sword instead of his own, just because the physical damage reduction on his own sword would be redundant here with this particular armor. Now, for this build, we will be using that new Ice Chariot vision card that we were just looking at for the agility. Summer Glaciella is going to be using her vision card for the area resistance, and then I will be pulling in that Sildra vision card for the slash res penetration to benefit all the units here, but also for that 30 crit rate to really make those follow-up attacks pop off. Now I do opt here for Dark Shiva in the sub slot to really push up Gilgamesh's magic total. And I'm using that over a generic agility card like Ramza or Black Rose, because honestly Sephiroth's agility is already crazy high in this build at 126, and I could use the Reliquary's Katana, to boost them up even further if I needed to. So those are the two builds that I have here, guys. If you are interested in taking a look at the finer details in these builds, as always I will have a link to both of them in the description below. So what is my verdict today on Gilgamesh? Starting with the positives, he's coming in as a very competent and competitive bruiser, with access to courage, a seal for that courage, HP barriers against both physical and magical, strong overall mitigation against area damage, and of course his absorbing attacks that will help keep him topped off during the battle, with the cherry on top being his innate reaction block and debuff weakening, which further sweeten the deal. So certainly the overall mitigation is going to be there and competitive for this unit, but the damage is also going to be popping off here as well, with his combination of incredible area damage coming in from his signature attack and limit burst, but also the chaser attacks capable of dealing high amounts of unit damage there on top of it. And the meta right now is really not all that well prepared to deal with any of this, with the units that are being played at the moment being much better suited against physical damage rather than Gilgamesh's own magical slashing. On the more negative side, perhaps this unit's biggest weakness is his innate accuracy, and certainly with so many builds out there currently opting for that semi-evasion, high luck play. Now Gilgamesh, he can certainly reach an adequate level of accuracy, but you do need to invest completely into it and sacrifice much of his damage to do so. As we saw though, Gilgamesh does have a couple of different 100% hits that he is able to fall back on, and his follow-up attacks are going to be completely dependent on his allies' hit rates and not his own. So he is able to hedge against this weakness, I think, considerably. In terms of mitigation, Gilgamesh is very well-rounded and one of the better units that we've seen innately, but he is carrying that very high weakness against strike damage of 15%. And if that strike team is carrying a barrier break, that certainly could spell trouble for Gilgamesh. I will say though that even though he is weak to that damage, remember he does have that CT break immunity, which certainly does help him, particularly against Alaya and 2P and kind of how they like to manipulate the turn order. So at least at the moment, it's not something that I'm hugely worried about, but certainly to keep in mind if maybe another next generation fist unit does come along in the future. Gilgamesh is also going to be very wary when it comes to status ailments out there on the battlefield, including against himself in the mirror match and kind of picking up that frostbite effect, as certainly his attacks are all very expensive AP-wise, and definitely that limit burst at coming in at 59 AP, that could really deplete his AP pool very quickly if he does have frostbite there on top of it. Of course, the elephant in the room in the meta right now is Sephiroth and sort of how popular he is as a unit. He is bringing in that curse effect, which can certainly shut down Gilgamesh here quite substantially. At the end of the day, though, Gilgamesh is the culmination of not only the Realmscourge storyline, but also of this recent ice and cold triangle meta that Gumi has been developing, adding yet another chess piece here that ties in so well to all of those teams that have been built out so far, but also fitting in very nicely with Sephiroth, as we did look at there in the mock builds, making him a very flexible and interesting unit. And certainly a very strong addition to the permanent pool right there alongside Jum the Celestial. So there it is, guys. Those are my thoughts today on Gilgamesh, Breaker of the Scourge. I am absolutely going to be pulling for this unit. As I said at the beginning of the video, I have long ties to this unit dating back to my first days playing the game, so it's a very nostalgic pull for me as well. And to be honest, they have made a very compelling package here with him, not only for his overall strength as a unit, but one that looks great aesthetically, has a meaningful tie into the lore of not only War of the Visions, but the Final Fantasy Brave Exvius lore as well. And also, I think is just going to be a very fun unit to play, as, you know, all these follow-up attack units generally have been. Let me know what you guys think about Gilgamesh in the comments down below. Are you going to be pulling for him, or are you holding out for Luciel or Cypher? While you're down there, if you did enjoy the video today, hit that like button for me. It really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. And if you like what I'm doing here on the channel, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more. And that's really all that I have to say for today. So as always, stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.